Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me? Do you hear? And maybe the people in the back, if you want to move up a little bit, that would be great. And welcome to our panel on Let's Get Social, the power of socially responsible sourcing. It should be a great, great panel. We have wonderful speakers, and I'm going to just speak for a couple minutes to introduce them and let them tell their stories. I am Katrin, and I am a designer and the moderator of the panel, and our panelists are Sheahan Stephen from Sheahan Stephen Sapphires, Ron Ringsrud from the Ron Ringsrud Company, and John Ford from Lightning Ridge Collection Opals. Okay. And now here's a shameless plug for my booth at the show. It's booth 3007. When you come into the Grand Ballroom, it's the second booth on the right. We have a lot of wonderful pieces with a lot of beautiful gemstones like we're talking about, and a new platinum collection there. So if you have a chance, stop by and see us. And I'll give you the overview to what we're talking about today. So it's the new buzzword, transparent ethical supply chains with, you hear this term, socially responsible sourcing. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard this term. You may know deeply what it's about. You may have just heard it bantered around. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. And the thing is, the key is that the demand for this is client driven. So what does this mean? I write for different jewelry publications, the Retail Jeweler and Southern Jewelry News. Some of you may know me from there. And my editors will ask me, they say, well, retailers are, reading the magazines. Why should they really care about socially responsible sourcing? Who really cares? Why is this an issue? It's an issue because its clients care about this. So customers coming in buying jewelry are interested in where the gems are sourced from. So that's where the demand for this concern about socially responsible sourcing comes from. Millennials especially are expecting transparency and awareness of how the gems and metals in their jewelry is sourced. So this is why you as retailers have to be aware of this, because your customers are concerned about it and want to know about it. So now the first step is first do no harm. How many have heard of that film Blood Diamond? Have heard about that? Yeah, so just about everybody. That created a big wave. Everybody was like, well, where are the diamonds really sourced from, and what are the living conditions of people that are mining these? And, are they coming from war-torn areas? Are they being used to finance, wars that aren't good and all that? So the first, just like the Hippocratic oath, do no harm, that's the first tenet. At a minimum, clients expect a guarantee that their source materials for their jewelry arise from conflict-free areas, and that local mining doesn't harm the environment or the mining communities. That's sort of a baseline. We want to be sure that the beautiful jewelry that we're getting isn't harming someone. That's the baseline. But then there's another level, and that's what we're talking about today, giving back. But beyond that, increasingly aware consumers are seeking a positive impact from the process of production. They want their treasured ring or pendant to positively contribute to the quality of life in the indigenous areas, to give back to the source, the local mining communities. What's happening there? Are these people being taken care of? Are they in good living conditions? And to increase prosperity and social justice. So now also, for those of you, how many here are retailers, are jewelry retailers? Okay. And what are the other people? Are you like designers or just lovers of gemstones, maybe? Okay. So especially for jewelry retailers, it's good to know that this socially responsible sourcing is a powerful concept generating a compelling story which retailers can use to create the meaningful experience that increasingly enlightened customers crave. So when we hear these stories that you're going to be hearing about in a minute, these are great stories that when you go in, when a customer comes in to buy a ring, and if you can say, do you know where this ring came from? Do you know who made it? Who the miners were? Who cut that gem? And is a person, and she's raising a family and all that. That is a wonderful, colorful backstory that helps in the promotion of selling gemstones. So we have three experts today from three areas: Sri Lanka, Colombia, and Australia, with combined decades of experience in indigenous mining areas. And they're sharing their hands-on experience with the latest developments in socially responsible sourcing and the impact it's having locally throughout the whole supply chain. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Sheahan Stephen from Sheahan Stephen Sapphires.
Thank you, Mia.
Thanks, Sheahan.
So briefly, I'd like to discuss my story.
Hold the mic up close to you.
Yes. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
much better.
So I'd like to briefly just discuss my story, over the next 10 minutes. And this is what has really impacted my life and my decision to go in, an ethical, sustainable business.
Hold it up. Yeah, Cliff. Can you all hear in the back? Can you hear them? Okay. Yeah. Keep it close to your mouth.
Really quickly, ethics, sustainability, and transparency. This is my story. So basically, I was born into a lower middle class family in Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar, but it was, the country was embroiled in a civil war for nearly 30 years. And it impacted us. I mean, on a very basic level, my parents and myself, being a part of the Tamil minority, makes up about 10% of the population there, being marginalized and having those issues and encountering that, and then eventually having to relocate, learn a completely new culture, and being able to adapt, it impacted our family. So that's basically the baseline of where we started. When I talk about ethics, we're essentially talking about the human beings involved in the industry. Where I come in, I'm teaching the people on the ground. That would mean in the industry, the miners, the treaters involved in heat treatment, and production, meaning cutting. I treat them basic foundational issues such as fair wages, health, nutrition, finance, being able to manage their finances, because a lot of the people involved in the processes, in the gemstone process, they don't have that basic foundation. Most of the mining that takes place in Sri Lanka is about three hours east of the capital. About 80% of the population of Sri Lanka lives in a rural environment, so their accessibility to education is lacking. So when people like myself come into Sri Lanka, set up commerce there, we're able to also impact these lives. On the sustainability end, we're primarily dealing or speaking about the environmental factors, how that's impacting the environment as far as nature, as well as the animals that are in the mining region. One thing to keep in mind is in Sri Lanka, there's roughly 5,000 pit mining licenses that are given out. And as we go through the 20 slides that I have, we're looking at the transparent chain of custody. So starting with a mining process and the different mining types to heat treatment and then cutting. And lastly, I'd like to touch on why transparency is important. And I think depending on the background of the company and the country, the importance of it can change. So, for example, with a country like Sri Lanka, where terrorism was a major issue, making sure that the chain of custody is tight in the sense that the funds are going into the correct hands. And with artisanal mining, especially, these are mining operations that are typically 50 miners or less, and anywhere down to two people, and making sure that they get funded correctly so they can continue their livelihood. So the first picture I have here is of an open pit mine. Again, the first step of a transparent chain of custody, we want to verify that the government licenses are given out correctly to the correct business owners. Open pit, this is typically about 20 feet deep, as far as about 200 feet wide. And we dig until we can see this grayish material, and that is called elam. You can see this better here, and that's the typical sign that we're hitting gem-bearing soil. So in Sri Lanka, most of the mining area, actually all of it is alluvial. So it's either primary alluvial or secondary alluvial, so we're always going to have to pump out the water. And typical mining method where we're using one backhoe. The larger the operation, I've seen a couple operations where they're going to have as many as 3 backhoes being used. Another mining method, and again, in Sri Lanka we have 3 methods. The first one was an open pit. The second method is this type, which is a river mine. And you can see a couple guys are in the water here, and then they use a little boat where they dump the sand into. One thing I want to make really clear is, I had this conversation just a few minutes ago with Francis about proper procedure. And for most of these people, this has been a passion in their families for hundreds of years, possibly even thousands. So for us from the West, stepping in and telling them, this is not the correct way of mining, it's not our say. Over time, it will actually automatically adjust as they get accustomed to what they're comfortable using. But currently, this is what's done. And most of the alluvial minerals that are river mined are what you're going to see in milli, finished milli. So you can see here, these guys are just picking up the sand, dumping it into the boat, and then they're going to be sorting and sifting through that right there. This is a pit mine, like I said earlier. About 5,000 licenses are given out yearly, and they're usually done on a 2-year lease. And even the temperature, the environment down there, it's harder on me. But these guys have been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years. It's a lot easier on them, even though the conditions are uncomfortable. And here we have a typical pit mine where they use these leaves to help drain the water out of the walls of the mine. These are rubber tree that they use to keep the pit stable. The next step of chain of custody, again, as we move from the 3 different mining methods, we move to heat treating. Again, with blue sapphire, 99% of blue sapphires are going to be heat treated I'd say about 85% of all sapphires, including fancy, but 99% of blue sapphires. So keeping track of from chain of custody turns into finance, and we want to make sure that the funds are going, again, into the right hands. So first step after it comes out of the pit or the mine is going to be heat treated. And over here you see this material is called gyoda. The chemical composition is aluminum oxide. And then during the treating process or heat treatment process, it will actually turn blue. Sri Lankans and the Thais are known to be the industry experts in this area. Mr. Dhanapala here is one of the experts in Sri Lanka, probably one of the top 3 in the world. This is a gas heater. Runs for anywhere from about 4 to 7 hours, starting out at room temperature and up to 1950 centigrade. Incorporation of family is important. It's just being able to connect with the locals there. And that's what this looks like after it's been heat treated. These are a couple of the miners from the Ratnapura area who've been supplying me for the last 13 years. So building those relationships are important. I think at the end of the day, at the end of the day, we want to be able to support the families and the relationships that we build over a number of years. Crystal specimen. And then we move on to the cutting step here, preforming. And Akila here is one of my expert cutters, so he's been a master cutter for me for nearly 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sheahan. And now we have Ron Ringsrud from Ron Ringsrud Emeralds.
Thank you, Mia.
That was a great thing.
I really liked Mia's summary at the beginning.
Thank you.
And it really does show us how far we've come in the last 20 years for ethics in gemstone sourcing. I started my company in 1983 after working for GIA for 3 years. And my first activity was right here at Tucson. I had a booth where we, with a partner, I started selling emeralds. And from there, I made a whole career out of just Colombian emeralds. A lot of people branched out to Brazilian emeralds or tanzanite or other stones, but my entire career has been only emeralds and only emeralds from Colombia. I have a house in Bogota that I bought in 1993, and I go about 6 times a year to Colombia for business. The ethics in the colored stone world is all about big-heartedness. We want the community and the families to be involved and supported, and like Mia says, it's the clients and the customers lately that are demanding that the source of their stones is known, and that the miners, not just the jeweler, but the miners and the intermediaries also have a chance to send their children to college and to have a good life. Now, in the colored stone world, there's a lot of changes going on right now. There's a lot of big mines coming into Colombia that are operating, but there are still many small artisanal mines, and it's going to be that way in the future as well. For a brief few years, I worked for the Muzo Emerald Company, and the result of their coming into the emerald mining business is interesting. I want to talk about that in just a few minutes. But the average price of emeralds has gone up many times in the years that I've been in business. And it's very hard now for a young person to come into the colored stone business and make it, because it used to be that $400,000 would have a big array of emeralds. Now it's just 2-3 stones and you have $400,000 right there. But we try to support the young people that do come in to do this business. And you can see, you recognize Edward Bohm there. This brings out another point that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was easy to go out into the source of the, well, what did I do?
It's okay. You're okay. You're okay. You're okay.
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 It's as bigger companies come into the emerald world, it's harder to go to the source and deal with the artisanal miners, but it is still possible, and I'm really happy to see that happening today.
There you go.
I have no idea why that image is in my selection. Okay, what I want to talk about is going back to 1983, a long time ago, the BBC started. What would happen if I push this button again?
And we thought we were so on top of the whole
Right.
thing. Right? Did you push a button
Okay.
to change it? Let's see your clicker here. There you are. That's right, right? But this isn't your slide. There we go. That's right.
Okay,
right.
that's
yeah,
good.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Is that it?
BBC went to Colombia and they did a remarkable documentary about the Kogi Indians. And these are a group of Indians along the coast of Colombia in Santa Marta that during the Spanish conquest in the 1500s, in the 1600s, as Spain conquered all of South America, the Kogi Indians, because they're in Santa Marta, every time the Spanish showed up, they would just move higher and higher up into the mountains. And there's a mountain on the coast there that goes up to like 14,000 feet. So by the time the Spanish were done, the Kogis, who had never been dominated by the Spaniards, they were up to about 11,000 feet altitude with a pure culture that never changed with the conquest of South America. And the Kogis were very simple, big-hearted, and they were very intuitive with the sky, the earth, and the water beneath them. In fact, some of the Kogi priests could detect just through their own intuition where the water was running underneath the ground, and they could tap into that. And it's a remarkable culture. And the Kogis, they had gold from that same mountain they lived on. And the Kogis referred to us, the Western civilization, as the little brothers. They were the intimate people with nature, and they would say, well, you little brothers are polluting the air, and you're polluting the earth, and you take from the earth and never give anything back to the earth. And I thought, well, so I was a young gemologist at the time watching this documentary, and it really moved me that these Indians are talking about, well, you should give back to the earth. So when I started going to Colombia frequently, I and some friends of mine, we all felt the same way. So what we started to do was we started to do a little ceremony of giving back to the earth. And I would invite people over to my house, and we would have a tray of earth taken from the emerald mining region. And among our little group were emerald dealers, emerald exporters, jewelers, and goldsmiths. And we would take little pieces of emerald, little pieces of gold, little stones, and little things, and we would return those pieces in a very sincere ceremony to this plate full of earth from the mining region. And we would express our wishes for the community and for the world. And we started doing that, and we ended up doing it once or twice a year. And it was actually, it felt kind of very appropriate because here we are, people who gain our entire living from the emeralds that come from the earth.
Oh, is it working? Can you click?
So
Yeah.
we would we would do this in larger and larger groups as the years went on. And from about 1990 to the year 2000, this is what we did. But I noticed also that one of the pearl harvesters from the South Sea did something similar. He returned pearls to the sea in recognition that his product also comes from the ocean, comes from the earth that we live on. And it really inspired me to keep doing that, because I thought, well, I'm not the only one giving back to the earth here. And so here's an image of Tucson. I want to tell you that a couple of times, our little group of people, we would go out into the mountains in the evening. We'd choose one night, there'd be about 10 or 15 of us. We'd go out into the valley and up the mountain, past the big A that for University of Arizona. We'd find a remote spot that we liked, and we would dig a little hole, and we would throw little stones in there and little pieces of gold, and anything that came out of the earth, we would be returning it to the earth. And it felt so rebellious, it felt so revolutionary that in the distance we could see the lights of Tucson, and everybody in Tucson is selling stuff that they took from the earth and marketing it and living off of it. But here we were, little group of rebels, were returning little pieces to the earth. And there was this one lady, she had a star quartz, about 80 carats. It was worth like $500. She threw it in the hole, and we had our little ceremony. We covered it up, pushed a boulder over it, and walked away feeling like we accomplished something for giving back to the earth. And then something interesting happened. In the newspaper, we started seeing things about corporate social responsibility. And I don't know if you remember, but 10 years ago, 20 years ago, corporate social responsibility was a brand new thing. It was a new and surprising concept to show up. So there we were. We'd be looking at each other. Well, I think we did it.
He hit something
We thought,
on his
I
clicker
think
and
we
it took it from
accomplished it. Do
being
we have to keep
full
doing this
screen
little
to-
ritual?
to-
It's
to
kind of a
showing
hassle.
The whole slide.
So
on the
around
left.
2002, we stopped
Yeah, it's
doing
moving
it, but
okay, but
it
it's
was
not
so
just the full
interesting
screen.
to see that corporate social responsibility has come a long way, even from the year 2000. And I was one of the people that went to a meeting in the World Bank about colored stones, about social corporate responsibility and fair trade. And Rappaport was there, Columbia Gem House, what's his name? Eric Brownwert, he was there. He's one of the pioneers of giving back to the earth and fair trade. Brownwert was there, and we talked about what we were doing, and it was very interesting. The World Bank was hosting the whole event, so I thought that was very significant also.
He hit something on the clicker and it changed it so it's
And,
not full screen.
In Colombia, the Colombians, because of the reputation as a company that export a lot of drugs, smuggling, cocaine, gang activities, Medellin cartel, the Colombians were extremely aware of the importance of reputation. Every time a Colombian emerald dealer would travel to Hong Kong or the United States, they would be chosen to have their bags inspected, and they had to patiently go through this time after time after time. So when the movie Blood Diamonds came out, the Colombians thought, well, we've got to polish up our reputation, make it spotless, because we're starting out on the wrong foot anyhow. And it was beautiful to see how much Colombia has responded to that. And my activities also, I started a nonprofit called Clay Hands, which promotes and uses alternative construction like adobe, pressed earth, and barreque to create sustainable buildings that people can use year after year. Father Gabriel Mejia is one of the people we did a project for He rehabilitates street kids and delinquents in Colombia and has many centers, including a state-sponsored delinquent imprisonment facility. And he has such a great record of rehabilitation that he was invited to Rome to speak at the Vatican about rehabilitation, and he met the Pope there as well. This is what we built. It's 10 by 14 meters, and it's used twice a day as a study hall and a meditation hall for the boys. Now, I'd like to finish mentioning at the Muzo Emerald Mine, we're doing another similar structure, and it's part of the Muzo Mine's corporate social responsibility program also. This will be a community center for not only the emerald miners, but their families and anybody in the local town of Muzo, which is about 8 kilometers away from the mine of Muzo, the Muzo mine. And as far as the future goes, this is the future. The Muzo mine is the future because Muzo was purchased by a private company from Houston, Texas back in 2013. They acquired 100% of the operation of the Muzo mine from the Carranza family and the Molina family. And the Muzo Corporation, they came from the petroleum world, from the big corporate world, and they wanted to do everything right. And the mine at the time had 400 miners. Now they have 900 emerald miners permanently working with salary, and none of the miners get paid cash. They all have to have a bank account. They get paid straight to their bank account, and by requiring these miners to have a bank account, that means that they are registered socially and by the government, and they can benefit from the social services of health and social security and things like that. And it has transformed the emerald mining region so much that land values around the little town of Muzo have doubled, basically. And all of these miners have families. There's a little boom going on right now because 900 miners on salary is a pretty amazing thing, considering the artisanal nature of mining before that, where in the booms everybody was rich and happy, but those months that you're waiting for some more emeralds to come out, nobody was happy and everybody was suffering. So I'd like to encourage people to pay attention and watch the continued evolution of ethical sourcing of gemstones. The big-heartedness that we started with is expressing itself in this form. It's a beautiful thing to see.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ron, and congratulations for all the wonderful work that you're doing. And now we have John Ford, who is the expert on Lightning Ridge opals, and he's going to tell us about what's going on there. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm John Ford. I specialize in Lightning Ridge opal. I've won a few Spectrum Awards, and we sell my winning designs and, of course, loose. My talk really is more stone-wide than in Australia. I will touch on a few parts of Australia, but it's mainly tailored for the retailer so you know how to questions to ask and how properly to address this subject. Let me see where we're at on the slides. Okay, we have a few Australian slides if you want to read. Ethical, socially responsible supply chain, it begins at the gem source, where the mine is, and it ends in the retail jeweler showcase. The buzzwords, transparent supply chain, socially responsible supply chain, it all has to do with having a transparent, ethical supply chain. They're the same. You can't have one without the other. You can't say, oh, we're socially responsible, but you don't have an ethical supply chain. They go hand in hand. What is socially responsible sourcing? It means different things to different people, and that's one of the questions you might want to ask some of your vendors. It's not just giving lip service or a feel-good gesture. It's a serious issue. To me, socially responsible sourcing means compliance with international laws, money laundering, terrorism, no form of child labor, involuntary forced labor, compliance with our environmental laws. Like in Australia, our biggest problem is we have people that break into mines at night, and the miners call them ratters. We have signs with a rat on them with an X through it, like the Ghostbusters sign. It's a major problem. Those people contribute to money laundering, corruption. So in our particular situation, how I address that is I have contracts that have to be signed, a legal contract, and we don't deal with anyone that we know doesn't have a registered claim number, and we take the necessary steps to make sure that our goods are proper goods. Okay, so socially responsible sourcing. Let's get really back to business practices, ethical business practices. We all know what that means. And a good example and a good question to ask, if you're a miner, gem cutter, goldsmith, whoever's working in your supply chain, are they paid a livable wage and are they subject to discrimination? It's pretty straightforward. In this business, it's a critical question to ask. But here's something that you need to know. How do you know when you're going to somebody's booth at AGTA what is what? I'll give you a few questions to ask. Ask them about their sourcing and manufacturing process. Are they actually manufacturing the goods? We take the goods from the ground. I manufacture them in-house all the way to the showcase. They go to the retail jeweler and they get sold. It's a critical question to ask. Different people have different processes. Do you do personal site inspections? Do they actually go where the goods are produced? Do they actually go and visit where the production is happening? Do they have contracts? I have a contract. If anybody wants to see it, there's a few things that are proprietary we have taken out that we make all our suppliers sign. And it's taken a lot from the United Nations rulings and literature. Do they have ethical business practices? That's, again, it comes back to ethical business practices. Those are the questions. And of course, when you walk around the show, you hear different people, and you ask them some of these questions. And if the answer to any of these questions is no, or the response is vague, sometimes responses are vague. Oh, I buy from Company X, who's been in business for years. That's meaningless. It has no bearing on whether a supply chain is ethical or the sourcing is responsible. Either you have a clean supply chain or you don't. I'd be very suspicious of anyone that can't answer these questions if you want to have an ethically clean supply chain. Now, this is what we do. Formal sales contracts with our suppliers. Site visits to the mine at least once a year. I'm in Australia about a month out of the year. We actually have cutting facility there that I oversee. Again, we oversee our gem cutting. The gems we source like diamonds. When you're a manufacturer like me, you use other things besides the opal that we mine. So what I do to make sure that the diamonds I'm sourcing are ethical is I require formal affidavits that they are screening for synthetics and participating in the Kimberley process. We also spot check for synthetics. It's required by a number of the vendors that I sell to that these things be done. And I interact personally with everybody in the supply chain. I mean, you have to know the people. In my booth is one of the miners that mines year-round that I work with. We always generally have a miner in our booth. It's important to know where it comes from, but I also sit down and talk to the jewelers that work with me, the stone setters. We make sure that there's interaction, and if there's a problem going on in the supply chain that would not be an ethical business practice, I make sure I can see if I can find that if there is a problem, because if there's a problem, you need to correct it. Why is it important? Why do y'all think it's important? Anybody? Consumers are well informed today. Everybody has access to the internet through an iPhone or whatever, and they don't want their celebratory gifts associated with conflict or exploitation. It's a coming trend. No, 75% of the people out there probably that are in the retail business don't realize it yet, Maybe it's 80%, but it's a coming trend. And it's up to the retail jewelers to know the nature and origin of the products that you sell, and that you can assure the consumers that the product is produced ethically. And it has benefits. It benefits the supply chain, which are the people that are producing your materials, and it also benefits the fact that you're selling a gift of happiness, because we're in the happy business. We're not in the blood diamond business. We're not in the someone who's been victimized supplying you the gems you're selling. So let's keep it happy and make sure that we have confidence in what we source and who we sell it to, and they have that same confidence. Thank you.
Thank you all. Can you hear? Can you all hear? Okay. Thank you all. I thought those were really interesting talks and coming from all kind of different angles and approaches. And I wanted to just ask the panelists what they thought about this. Are you finding in the people that you're selling to, the retailers, that there's a growing interest in this concept of socially responsible sourcing? Are they hearing from their customers more that they want to know where the gems are coming from, where the metals are coming from, and where is this coming from the consumers? Is it more young people? Is it like millennials and younger people that are stimulating this, or where is this desire coming from? So if anybody has anything they want to say about that, yeah.
From the manufacturer side, we had a sale with a company from Europe. What we think made the sale happen, it was extremely expensive black opal, was the fact we were able to communicate the actual mineral claim number it came from and the name of the mine, which is something that they have not been getting previously. And it helped me break into a market at this show with this particular group from Paris that I've never had. As far as from the retailers I deal with in the U.S., a lot of them are very concerned about synthetics in the finished jewelry coming in from their suppliers, and they're also concerned about gem treatments. My particular stone is 100% natural, and some of it has to do with wanting to create an environment with millennials that satisfies their need. A lot of it is just covering their own problems, because everyone's so worried about something being sold and coming back to hurt them in a legal matter. Because as society changes and information happens, you have to make sure that what you're telling a client is actually correct. And I think both those sides drive the issue today.
Great.
There's a number of jewelry stores in California that I do regular business with, and even though some of them are small jewelry stores, they expect that their supplier of emeralds has a program of social responsibility or ethical sourcing. And the bigger the company, the bigger the buyer, the more expectations they have. Tiffany's their New York flagship store, they bought a big emerald a few years ago, and it was very important to them that the sourcing was known, that the miners were getting a good portion of the benefit of that purchase, and it was really nice to see.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, from my experience right now, and I think Ron hit on a good subject. Tiffany's, going back almost 40 years, they have been one of the leaders in our industry in transparency and ethics. And going back to also what John was saying, being able to trace the material back to specific mines, this was something that was requested from me as well. The ability to do it in developing countries, such as Sri Lanka, is something that's continuing to evolve. But depending on the scalability of the project or the mine, right now I would say ethics, transparency, sustainability, it's actually driven from the front end. So
based on the amount of information that's provided or available online, the consumer is demanding that, and then that pushes us in the back end to be able to develop the information for them. So it's up to you, the retailer, to be able to get and validate that information for your customer accurately. So in our end of the industry, in the back end, validation is important, and it's extremely important that you're able to validate that from multiple sources to make sure that the accuracy is right for your customer.
Great, great. And what do you think? What do you think that customers are more interested in? Just that everything is done ethically and people have a good standard of living and all that, or are they also interested in like particular stories about particular who made this, who designed this, who cut the stone, and like the personal story of the family that was involved in it? Are you hearing both of those interests, or one more than the other?
So yeah, I'll start with that. I'm actually seeing a combination of all those factors. So it really depends on what the customer or the end user is most passionate about. For me, in my case, it was really important on the humanistic end because of the civil war that took place in Sri Lanka. But for some customers, it's going to be their ability to connect with the story. So whether that's a civil war, whether that's supporting specific cultural communities, or that could be just being able to connect with specific families that are producing jewelry. I think it's your ability to get the information that your customers, again, are looking for, and finding the right supplier that actually is able to provide you with that information.
Okay, yeah.
The story is more and more important as time goes on. The customers are actually delighted to hear that the seller, that's me, that I know the person that mined it, or where the mine was, or how it came out. And it's so, they're also delighted to hear that Colombia, over the past 20 years, has overcome its social problems of organized crime, of smuggling, of gang activity. And right now, Colombia is enjoying huge foreign investment, tourism like never before, and a very stable political system. And the cultural integrity of the country, the strength of that overcame a lot of things. And people love to hear that, and they love to know that they're supporting something that's rolling forward positively.
We do a lot of interactive videos in our booth, but the most important thing is we've started bringing the miners I have to the show. And actually, you can come out of the booth and he'll talk to you about mining for 20 minutes if you want. It's very important. In some stores, that connection means all the difference in the world, because they take that story and they bring it back. And it's something that they use to share to their customers. So I think it's very important that they have a good knowledge of where things come from. And if you can bring actually a person that's mining it, that's really incredible.
Okay, great. Let's just open up the floor to some questions. Yeah, could you use the mic here, because it's being recorded, and that way it will be.
Hey guys, thanks for a great presentation. Question for primarily for the gentleman from Sri Lanka and Colombia. How are you guys verifying the chain of custody as they come from the various mines to ensure that no illicit material is making its way into your supply chain?
One time I was hired by some geologists to source emeralds from every one of the mine fronts in Chivor, Cosquez, Muzo, Peñas Blancas, and one in La Pita. And after I did this huge project for them, it cost a lot of money to do, took over 10 days, and a huge trip. About a year later, I was talking to Brendan Lars at GIA, and I mentioned the name of the people that hired me, and he said, oh, they're working for the Defense Department, because when some Tanzanite was found to be sold in Africa that was supporting a terrorist group that was mutilating kids and chopping hands off, the Defense Department wanted to know, how can we scientifically source these stones all the way back to which mine they came from? And that was an ongoing study that's happening. In Colombia, however, the artisanal mine and the official mining region is a pretty small region. No mine is more than 10 kilometers from each other. And so the mere fact that the paramilitary or guerrilla activities that were in some of the remote regions of Colombia, those never came to the emerald mining region, because way back in 1989, the Colombian emerald miners had to resist some of the attacks from the Medellin cartel, and I'm talking about Gacha Rodriguez, who is Pablo Escobar's partner. They tried to take over the emerald mine as a trophy and possibly as a way to launder money, but what we call the Emerald War lasted until 1993, when Pablo Escobar was killed. And the result of the Emerald War was specifically that no illicit operations ever came within the emerald mining region. And the miners, they're a pretty tough crowd. They managed to repel this attack from the Medellin cartel. And it's always been a region that's been free from any of that activity. So it's not a problem in that particular area. The problem is later on in the supply chain, who's laundering money. But even that, I'm sure you'll agree with me, John and Sheahan, diamonds are way more used for laundering money than colored stones, because sapphires or opals or emeralds, they're just not that liquid. You have to sell them one at a time. You have to haggle over the price. Diamonds, however, have a price list. You don't have to know anything, and you can have a bag full of them. And they're very liquid, and they've been used way more than colored stones for laundering money.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that question as well. So I'm a big believer in redundancy, and redundancy eliminates a lot of mistakes. So I just wrote an article for Prism last month in December, and in that article I used the Boeing scenario of what caused the 737, 800, and 900 to crash. So in our industry, or in what I do, the steps that I take to make sure it's redundant is, one, I put an explicit amount of trust in evaluating the people who manage my operations. And it's actually how I built my business, was based on intuition. So intuitively, I have 3 managers in place who constantly, their job is to visit the mining sites to make sure operationally things are functioning how I have set up. Second is that I'm in Sri Lanka every 12 weeks, which puts a tremendous amount of stress on me, but that's how I'm able to make guarantees to my customers. So if any of you have ever heard of the 10,000 hour rule, that's how many hours it takes to become an expert at something. I probably put in about 30,000 so far, and I'm 43. So I've spent a lot of time doing this. So through repetition, through redundancy, and the last factor that I use are multiple laboratories to verify that the information is correct. So before any of the Sri Lankan sapphires or whatever origin that is specifically told to me, before they're exported out of the country, validated by a local lab. Second, it's then, once it arrives in the US, it's validated again. So end of the process, I can guarantee to the customer that it is what I say it is.
And did you want to say anything about that?
No, he makes it directed.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, use the mic.
Well, first off, I just really want to acknowledge and thank the 3 of you as just representatives of this vitally important aspect of this industry. And a question that arose as I was listening to you guys is there a growing collective of representatives of sellers like yourselves who are establishing some sort of resource for us as buyers to know who to go to when we are committed to having this type of transparency and ethically and socially, environmentally responsible, chain. Is there a conversation that's happening? Is there some sort of organizational activity where there's like a resource of a listing of people like-minded and committed in this business, like the three of you are?
Would anybody like to respond to that?
I'll give you my opinion, and it's pretty strong. I believe that you as the customer needs to verify the source of the product. And I think, for example, there's the AGTA, there's the AGS, there's so many trade organizations, and I believe that these organizations can end up pulling us in different directions. But at the end of the day, you need to verify that for yourself, because I think the organizations are also trying to pull us in different directions as far as the suppliers. So, and it can become a dicey subject. So I've personally seen certain organizations that operate differently in different countries.
Let me just add one thing. There's the Jewelers Vigilance Committee at JVC. You can go to their website, and they have really good, a holistic view of the whole emerging trends and what the current standards are through, international organizations and things like that. But go ahead.
I agree with what you said.
Yeah.
I mean, what we make in our advertisement, we make it a point to point out that we are responsible sourcing. But, there's the old saying, buyer beware. And there's no group that can guarantee on a large scale in this business that everything is clean and wonderful. There's firms that do audits and et cetera, but it's really buyer beware. Ask the questions, and that way you really know and make a judgment call on whether the questions are being answered or satisfactory to you.
Just to add on to this, that right now, I believe that one organization that's taking a lead in this is CIBJO. Are you guys familiar with them? CIBJO, CIBJO, and they're actually based out of the Middle East, and they're taking the steps to make sure not just defining what sustainability and transparency is, but they're taking it one step further for their members to be able to validate it back to them. So, you know what, if you become a CIBJO member, then here's the process that CIBJO has put in place, and we have personally validated that our suppliers are following those steps. Personally, meaning essentially on site. It's actually a very difficult process to become a sustainable member for that organization.
Ron, did you want to?
I think you, as the buyer, have to participate in it also, just like John said. And it's part of the beauty of the colored stone world. You have to analyze the colored stone that you're buying, transparency, color, everything like that. But you have to also analyze the person who's selling it to you. And in the process, you'll probably develop a relationship with that person or that group or that company. And that's part of the fun, the beauty of being involved in colored stones.
Well, thank you very much. I think they've given us that we have to end now. However, I think that the people here might be able to stay a few minutes extra if you have additional questions and want to come up and discuss with them individually. So thank you all very much for attending. I think it was and thank you to our speakers for all their knowledge and participation.